Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, June 15th, 2023. Tonight's broadcast, the format of it is an open forum. For those of you that might be new to listening or watching, every other broadcast, we do a live Q&A for siblings, family, friends of our Evoke program. So you're welcome to also, if you're a listener, to send in questions to webinar@evoketherapy.com. We take all the pre-submitted questions that have come in from the last leftover broadcast or that have been emailed to us, and we put those at the top of the queue. You can submit any live questions during the broadcast tonight, and I'll get to those in as far as time permits. So let's get to our pre-submitted questions. I have a two-parter to begin. Somebody writes in and says, my son was at Evoke in the summer of 2021. As I listened to the abandonment podcast from this week, I was thinking about our time before he went to Willis. He was 12 and running away for days and weeks with no contact, doing drugs and other substances, and getting involved in a number of illegal activities. I think we had clear boundaries around no drugs, alcohol, or nicotine in the house. I also told him that at any time, day or night, if he needed me to pick him up and bring him home, I would do that. Many times I did leave the house in the middle of the night to bring him home from some scary part of town. Other times I was meeting him after a call from the police. When I picked him up, it was just a hug and a how are you doing? Are you hungry? And the like. There were no lectures or pleas to not run away again. Part two. I think if he had been bringing danger or violence to our home, if he were older, I would pick him up and I would have given him an open offer to pick him up. I would not have given him an open offer to pick him up. Perhaps it's just rationalizing something that is senseless, but I believe that he was running away because he knew I did not approve of what he was doing, and he was either unwilling or unable to stop those behaviors. So, on this continuum of unhealthy to healthy attachment, how do I balance the need for boundaries for me and my desire to accept him as his own self? By the way, a 12-year-old self and even his current 15-year-old self is so uninformed, it just begs for guidance. Of course it does. It's one of the greatest challenges in parenting, of course, is that their behavior and their development begs for our guidance. That's one of the challenges. First of all, what I want to say to you is your work sounds really good. Like you're doing great work. And there's no simple solution. There's no simple technique or hack that I can give you to this that's going to fix it. I mean, it sounds like you're actually setting clear boundaries and you're trying to also prioritize the connection or the attachment. What I've learned, especially in the past 5 years, and my therapist told me this many years ago, but I didn't quite have the lived experience of it until more recently, that in this complex, unimaginably impossible task of parenting, that as we get better and more evolved and practice our own way of doing it in the way that we've described, from the outside, there are going to be a lot of people that would judge it as inadequate, that would judge it as permissive or codependent or too rigid or too reactive. And the fact of the matter is, you have to find your own way, which it sounds like you're doing. You know, I don't know the options. One thing I want to just name is that our program and programs like ours are very expensive. The vast majority of the population of people, they can't afford these programs. Even middle class can't afford these programs because so many of them are included in ours have a challenge for insurance reimbursement, although there's some possibilities there. So it's really outside of the reach of most people. So let's just assume that these things are out of reach for you and for others. That's going to be pretty difficult. Now, if it's within reach, which is just a variable, not good, not bad, it's just something that is possible for you to do. You can do something like these programs. And it's a huge privilege that I myself have taken advantage of on a couple of occasions with my children. But how do I describe the escalating boundaries when you have somebody as willful as your child? Are you willing to draw a line in the sand, to 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 take a very extreme measures to try to manage their behavior? I guess you get to decide that. Or can you still go on the path that you're on, where you're setting clear boundaries, and then he runs away, and then you bring him back and show him love and compassion and curiosity about what's going on with him. Remember, in the long run of life, and I'm saying this for myself as much as I am for you. In the long run of life, who cares what people think about our parenting? Who cares what anybody thinks about our parenting? Professionals, peers, extended family members, that's not going to be the thing that keeps us up at night, is the judgments that we experience from other people. What's going to keep us up at night is not trying to find and to live our truth. So I don't really have anything to add that you're not already doing. You could take a more behavioral approach. There would be people inclined, and I'm not one of them, to give you advice on escalating behaviors that are natural and logical consequences. And you could try that. You're welcome to try that. If that's in your heart to do that, go for it. And you would have my support. But also, it sounds like with your child that he's willing to up the ante, to run away, to do something illegal. If programs are within your capacity financially, you can have him in a program, and that could be a really wonderful thing. I wish all of these programs, including ours, was more accessible to more people. That's why we participate so much in fundraising and charitable organizations, is try to extend our reach. That's why I do these podcasts and make them available to the public, is because some people only have that. Going to Al-Anon, going to Codependence Anonymous. Remember, when people go to Al-Anon, it's a lot like these broadcasts, these webinars. I'm very compatible with codependent recovery work. It's very, very compatible. That if you were to go to Al-Anon and Coda and Families Anonymous, you would have a fellowship that could support you. That the structure of it precludes people from giving you advice necessarily unless you have a sponsor. Then you're saying, I need somebody to kind of guide me through this process. But even most sponsors are going to give you some leeway about how you execute your own truth. But the point of this, if you went to these meetings, you would listen and hear people that are talking about people that are legally and utterly outside of their control. They would be talking about parents. Some of them would be talking about parents who passed away. Some of them would be talking about children who have passed away. Some of them would be talking about adult children or friends or spouses or ex-spouses. And all of these individuals and all these relationships, there's a limited amount of control that you can exercise over people to try to get them to change. So then the question becomes this: what do you do when you're confronted with somebody in a situation that you love and that you care about that you can't change? What do you do? And Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous and the work that I do is the answer to that question. I got my hair trimmed today, and I try not to do this, but I was in a mood. So I disclosed to the person cutting my hair what I do for a living, which of course led to questions about their personal life and the therapy session. There's about a 50-50 ratio of the way people respond when you tell them you're a therapist. Half of them ask for advice and present their life or their situations to you. The other half, very strangely, will start to teach you about therapy and to teach you what's wrong with parents and kids and relationships today. But this particular one started to ask me questions. And all the questions that she was asking me were about how to change her ex. And it was tragic because children are involved. And when children are involved, as a parent, your heart breaks for the fact that you might have an ex that is doing something harmful to your children, that doesn't rise to the level of reportable abuse or even abuse that you could take to the courts and get some kind of custody arrangement changed, but just normal, everyday, toxic parenting that we see in the world. And her questions were, what do I do about that? But it wasn't, what do I do about that? It was, what do I do about that to get him to stop doing it? So at the end of the day, we get confronted with the reality of this life, which is we can't control it. And the work in parenting doesn't mean that we throw up our arms and walk away and abandon any kind of dedication to our own work and our own parenting practice. It means that we come to terms with reality. And I just want to say to you, I don't know you, it doesn't show your name when these questions get posted, but I want to tell you, I just want to send you love and compassion and understanding, because from what you've told me, you're doing all the things that I would encourage somebody to do, not because the behaviors are right, because there's no right behavior, but because you're doing it from a place of awareness. You're doing it from a place of intention. You're consciously parenting your child. And those, or even the voice in the back of your head that says you should take a stronger behavioral stance, those that might say that, or those that have said that and that you've internalized and it's in the back of your head. Like I said, if you want to do that, do that. If that speaks to you, if it's something that you haven't tried and you want to go down that path, it might work. Do you see how that I respond to that? It might work. I don't know. I get from your post that you've been down that path and it probably doesn't work. Probably exacerbates and causes some kind of disconnect from your child. But the point I want to say is you're doing the work. It's real. I had a friend the other day tell me that they were sharing some of the stories about their own children and some of the struggles that they had. And his friend said to him, you know what you need to do? You just need to take a strong stance. You need to lay down the law and tell him the way that it is. And of course, what I said to my friend is, your other friend, I said to him, I said, your other friend, he doesn't really have experience in this area, obviously, because if he did, he would be much more humble about offering any kind of suggestions or advice. He'd be much more aware of how, again, how impossible parenting children who struggle is. And he would listen and he would show empathy. He might offer something that has worked for him that he's tried, but he would do it from a place of humility, and you would hear that and feel that. So you sound like you're doing the work that I would encourage you to do. Thank you. Next person writes and says, I've been listening to your podcast and doing my work since my daughter was transported to a wilderness program a year ago. I have an abandonment wound from my childhood, which causes me to be a reactive parent. I have a therapist and I'm planning on attending an intensive soon. We recently took our daughter on a 6-day camping trip. It went incredibly well. I was responsive instead of reactive when challenging situations arose. The next step will be a home visit in a couple of months. I have a trepidation and fear as my daughter was almost trafficked, groomed by adult men, and held against her will many times. Do you have any thoughts on how I can work through this so I can enjoy my daughter being home without dwelling on the past? Man, this is the second one in a row where you're doing all the work. I want to dissect this comment question just a little bit. A couple of points I want to plan on. I want to comment on. This line right here, I have an abandoned mood from my childhood, which causes me to be a reactive parent. Keep reminding yourself of that. Keep acknowledging that. Keep observing that. I cannot tell you how many clients, and this goes for our wilderness clients too, not just parents that I work with in this program, and not parents and individuals that I've worked with independent of the program. But I cannot tell you how many people identify, for lack of a better word, a pathology, an issue. And their first instinct is, how do I get rid of this? How do I make it go away? How do I improve this weakness? Understandable, of course. That's the way that most of us are trained, and we think about progress in those terms, in those ways. But often what I will say is slow it down. There's a lot of space in between understanding that you have a problem and improving it. And most of it is some kind of mindfulness. And I don't mean sitting and meditating necessarily, although that can help. I mean talking to a therapist. I think one of the biggest messages that gets translated inaccurately from the work that I do is that people think that in situations like this that I would think, identify it, fix it, and move on. It doesn't work that way. It is a wound that's going to be a theme in your life. My abandonment wound is still there. It still shows up under stress. It's still triggering for me. I still have conflicts with my wife that expose that wound for me. And this is after 25, 30 years of therapy, a PhD, and a robust therapeutic practice, participation in 12-step groups, all the things that I talk about, meditation, mindfulness, it's still a part of my life. It's still a part of my humanness. So the first comment that you made, what I would say to you if you were my client is, good job, you can talk about it. Good job, you can identify it. It's half the battle. When Fred Rogers said, if it's human, it's mentionable, and if it's mentionable, it's manageable, that's kind of what he was talking about. He's saying, talk about it, address it, sit with it, look at it, stare at it, ask it questions, learn about it. The trigger, as Rumi says, I think it's Rumi. I'm going to stop attributing it to one person because it's lots of people. But as many people say, the trigger is not in the way. The trigger is the way. And you won't exile this part of yourself. You'll become friends with it. You'll be on speaking terms with it. You'll know when it's sneaking up on you. You'll feel its tap on your shoulder. You'll feel its pull, its push. And then staying in a relationship and getting rid of the fantasy that we can eradicate it from your personality, that we can perfectly heal it as if it never existed, doesn't exist, won't exist, and probably is less than ideal. So I just want to say good on you for recognizing it and naming it, admitting it to yourself and to at least one other person. Obviously, around being trafficked or anything as severe as that, I need to be really careful in my next comment, which is we do everything we can to protect our children. But we can't do everything to protect our children. Right? We just can't. Children can be abused at church. They can be abused in Little League softball. They can be abused at sleepaway camp. They can be abused in a program. They can be abused at the grandparents' house. And we can't wrap our children up in bubble wrap with a hard hat on them and keep them in our sight the entire time. And so again, you have to figure out, you have to come to terms with the reality that you can't protect them completely and you can do some things. And where you draw, this is the key. Where you draw that line is where you draw that line. And knowing you have this trauma, knowing you have past traumas for your child, being in relationship to those traumas, talking to a therapist who can hold you, contain you, have compassion, model for you what I'm describing, which is not to try to fix it or eradicate the symptom, but to go down to the original room and sit with it as long as need be to understand its message, understand it's the way that it creeps in your body, in your mind, in your psyche. So that you know when a certain behavior or a certain instinct is arising in your body, you can say, this is the attachment wound. And over time, you can use the new programming, right? You can use the new software to deal with the old hardware, with the old wiring. You'll still be triggered. You'll still be at times overwhelmed, but you can talk your way through it. You're doing all the work. The fact that you're going to an intensive, the fact that you're, I think you talked about being in therapy. I hope so. Find a therapist who can sit with you for as long as you need. And in my case, that's, I think, forever. You know, I don't understand the idea of graduating from therapy for me in my life, because number one, I'm a therapist. Number two, I need 1 hour a week that's just mine to say all the things that I didn't feel like I could say all week, to explore my own issues, to reacquaint myself, to refine myself every week. So you're talking about big fears. You're talking about real wounds. And I would sit and listen to them. Ask them their names, so to speak, metaphorically. Ask them what they want of you. Try to kind of negotiate with them your wounds, your triggers, your traumas, where you can find a way to protect yourself but not limit yourself. And you know, the result of attachment-based therapy The result of a secure attachment is the sense that you are home, always, wherever you are. And so over time, this is true of me, and it's a continuum, and there's a ways to go on the journey, of course. But over time, you come to realize that you'll be okay. I remember last year I shared this, dropping my daughter off somewhere. It was within our my wife and myself, it was within our boundaries. It was within the privileges that she was allowed to have. And I dropped her off somewhere and I started to get scared that something could happen to her. And I remember thinking, you can deal with that. You know how to deal with trauma when it comes up. See, and the last thing I will say is, and this won't make sense to a lot of people, but the problem isn't the traumas that happen to us. If they were, we would be screwed because stuff happens. Death, disease, violence happens. The real important process is how we deal with it. And does the context that we live in provide a space to deal with it and move through the feelings? If you live a long enough life, even if you don't experience any kind of crazy big T trauma, like being trafficked, you're going to have death, you're going to have loss, you're going to have disease. You're going to know people who suffer from mental illness and addiction issues. And some of those examples in your life are going to be traumatic and difficult. But this way that we talk about, that we teach at Evoke, what I teach is you can get through it. You might need help. You might need a sponsor. You might need a trusted friend. In my case, in my life, I need a therapist. But I fear less about things happening, not because I can control them or stop them or prevent them, which is kind of what I thought it was going to be like, but because I'm home already. I'm okay. I know how to feel. I know how to grieve. I know how to move through loss and sadness and powerlessness. And I've had to learn that as an adult. And I've learned that through therapy because somebody had the ability to sit with me through traumatic experiences in my life. And now it's internalized. Thank you for the question. Wonderful work. Earlier this week, you talked about, somebody writes, earlier this week, you talked about intrusion. Can you share more about how intrusion shows up in our relationship with our children? If you know the three circles, it's getting inside of their circle. It's trying to control what they think and feel, believe, don't want, prefer, don't prefer, like, don't like, love, don't love. It's trying to get inside somebody's mind, psyche, and to try to insert ourselves in there. Let me give you a very practical and simple example. It's perfectly appropriate to say, if you show up with a positive drug test to your child, if you show up with a positive drug test, you're going to be grounded until you get a clean test. That's our rule. That's not being intrusive. But being intrusive is giving unsolicited advice and telling them, teaching them, you need to understand that drugs are bad. You need to understand the neuroscience behind it. You need to believe what I believe, think what I think, know what I know. We need to agree. You need to not be mad. You need to not be sad. Intrusion is getting in their circle, getting in the way of them discovering their truth. You have your truth. This work is not about shaping children to become versions of human beings that you can find safe and acceptable, or me either. It's learning how to be you in relationship with other human beings. It's learning how to feel and deal with what is present, with life, with death, and everything in between. So what I meant by that is the difference between a boundary and trying to control somebody. In my book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, the best chapter on this would be the chapter on control versus influence. In the second book, where I talk about boundaries, the 3 circles explanation. Instead of setting a boundary and saying, here's my line, I try to convince you to change your behavior, convince you to subscribe to my philosophy. convince you that what I want is right. If I can do that, if I can change you, then I don't have to set a boundary, which is terrifying and difficult and triggers my abandonment wound. Because if I set a boundary, you might go away. And I'm held captive by that history, that ghost in my past. So as we grow in this work, we're not inclined to give advice. We're not inclined to tell people what to do or to tell people the way it is or to convince people of our way of thinking or believing or feeling. When someone's sad, we don't try to get them to be not sad. When someone's angry, we don't try to get them to be not angry. When someone believes that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is wonderful, we don't try to convince them of the risks. When somebody believes it's okay to keep your room a mess, we don't try to convince them that cleanliness is next to godliness. In all of these examples, we learn what's our boundary? What could I do? And if you're a parent to a minor child, your boundary has an impact on them that's more significant. If the child is over 18, it's different. If the child is financially independent, it's different. If a friend comes to live with you, it's different, right? Your boundaries are they're gonna feel them. They're gonna experience them. But it's very different setting a boundary and taking care of yourself and trying to control what someone else does, wants, chooses, believes, feels, thinks. When a parent says, I want my child to think, I want my child to feel, doesn't matter what they say after that, I know they're being intrusive. I'll tell one last example because I could talk about intrusion for days. I said to my daughter, this is a story I've told a few years ago. I said to her on the way to drop her off at therapy, she said, what should I talk to my therapist about? And I said, I don't know. But I do know this, I said. If your therapist starts to give you advice, tell her you don't need another parent. You already have a parent. And I'm making fun of myself because that's what we parents try to do. We try to solve problems. Sometimes I try to solve problems that aren't even problems. I do that often. I feel intrusion usually is in anxiety. It's driven from an anxiety in me. And I think the solution is to change you. So I get into your circle, I get into your space, I get into your head to manage my anxiety. It's managing an external person in this case instead of dealing with the internal state. Thank you. Somebody writes, aggression, overt and passive, has been normalized from my family of origin. The light bulb has been illuminated for me, and I'm working daily to shift this cycle of violence. My son is home from over a year away, 4 months at Evoke and a year at a residential therapeutic boarding school. So much has progressed into a healthier realm. Yet I see my son slipping back into shutting down and lashing out to get what he wants. He is sad because his world has shifted immensely since he was gone. His best friends have moved away. His stepfather and I have divorced. I am living between two countries. I have so much compassion for him, for all of us. I am so grateful for my world falling apart. I have a center now that has never been available before. I see this and his abuse and know that he is suffering, and I don't want to perpetuate the cycle. How much abuse does one tolerate? If I can tolerate it, is that okay? Am I perpetuating the violence? That's difficult. It's a great question, by the way. Let me deconstruct it again. My ability to contain somebody, to tolerate somebody, to be patient with somebody is not that I'm suffering abuse beyond what I can suffer. I mean, sometimes it is when I'm in my stuff. But let's assume for a minute if I'm talking about the ideal, okay? First of all, the first answer to the question is you draw the line on the abuse or the behavior exactly where you want to. Nobody can answer that question for you. And if they do, they're off track. If somebody tells you, I wouldn't listen to that, you might say, I will. I will. But what happens over time as we grow is it doesn't hurt anymore. Or it hurts less. We probably never get to the place that we become the Buddha, right? But remember, the key to the Buddha is not the fact that the Buddha has so much compassion and patience. The key to the Buddha, the trick to the Buddha, is the amount of time that he took to take care of himself, the self-care, the meditation, the alone time. He fed himself, or this figure that I'm describing feeds himself or herself or themselves enough so that they have the capacity. So, there's no generic line to draw. There are days when I can listen to a lot, and there are days when I can listen to very little. What's important in that equation that I just described is that I own that it's about my capacity. What I do instead, when I'm working from my non-healed, non-whole place, is I make you the problem. How dare you talk to me that way? This is abusive. You're being inappropriate. You've stepped over the line. Nobody's going to take this from you, right? I make my judgments about you. You're the problem. The fact of the matter, folks, you get to decide what's okay. And I or any therapist doesn't get to tell you, or ideally wouldn't tell you. Right? You get to, the answer to the question about where do you draw the line is the answer about who you are. And who you are is not a static answer, because who you are can change from, earlier this morning I was a hungry, tired person. This afternoon I was an exhausted, stressed out person. This evening I might be a relaxed, letting go person. Because I'm like you, I fluctuate, my energy fluctuates. So nobody gets to tell you where to draw the line. You get to decide. When you go to Al-Anon, they don't tell you what boundaries to set. They teach you about boundaries and selfhood so that you get to decide. And the great departure, the thing that I struggle with every day of my life, which is why I teach it so much, the great departure from codependency into recovery is the shift from the right way to my way. Like I said in The Audacity to Be You, the whole premise of the book is you don't get to be right anymore. You don't get to win or be good anymore, but you do get to be you. You do get to be a self, and that is so much better. So there's no right answer to the question. If I were your therapist, we would talk it through. I would help you get in touch with what's going on or what's blocking your awareness, your decision. Maybe it's your shame, maybe it's your guilt. Maybe it's the minute you set a boundary with somebody, you lose control. That's the irony of it. If I were to tell you let's say you were my friend, and I were to tell you a truth about how I felt about something that you did and set a boundary about it, I am letting go of control of how you react. Conversely, if I try to manipulate and change you and get you to see the error of your ways, don't set a boundary, don't directly tell you how I feel, I'm holding on tightly, trying to control you. Do you guys see the difference? Boundaries that are clear are about letting go of control. People that let go, in quotes, aren't more passive. They're more assertive. They're more clear. They're more active. They have clear boundaries from a clearer place inside of themselves. People that are less evolved, less aware, less healed, try to control everybody around them because the internal state feels so empty or so out of control that they experience their emotions to be at the whim of their circumstances, their situations, of what people do. They don't know that the responsibility is theirs to manage that. So they try to control everybody else. And this goes with children, spouses, friends, colleagues, everybody. Again, these questions come from such a place where it's like you guys are advanced therapy people. You've gotten the basics, and it's just the practice. And I'm really appreciating that you're asking them. Somebody says, can you speak about abandonment as it relates to somebody adopted? When somebody is aware consciously or unconsciously that they're adopted, they're aware of something, that the person who ideally was supposed to love them and be there for them gave them up. Yes, everybody would tell you in adoption support groups and adoption literature that the parent that gives up a child for adoption is loving the child, is seeing the child, is making sure that the child gets what they need, having a better life. That's the rational side of it. The child's experience, the primitive experience isn't that. It is that people that are supposed to love me can leave me forever, forever. And so do I have to be good? If I had fewer needs, would my mother or father have kept me? If I were, quote unquote, a good baby, would they have kept me? And so it is the experience of having been giving up, having been given up. That's either unconsciously or consciously, because most parents choose to tell their children, teach their children about the adoption, of course, which is recommended. But it can be unconscious also. But that awareness that the person that was supposed to be there for you no matter what isn't, no matter what the rational stuff said about this the last couple of broadcasts. People start to react from a place about trying to get people not to leave them. And when you do that, when you're held hostage by your abandonment wound, you lose your authentic self and you develop symptoms. Simple as that. You lose the true or the real or the authentic self, and then symptoms appear to express the unfelt, unmet needs, the unfelt feelings. And we call those symptoms pathology. And if they're organized in a certain pattern, which they tend to be, we call it a diagnosis or a disorder. And so psychotherapy, and at Evoke, at least, is getting back to the real self, the true self, and creating a relationship between client and patient, client and student, client and excuse me, therapist and client, therapist and patient, therapist and student. It's creating a therapeutic relationship where it's safe. You can be yourself. You can say the hard thing. You can even tell me bad things about me. And what I will do if I'm doing my work, doing my job, is I will thank you for it. Now, if you're just trying to be cruel for the sake of being cruel, I can terminate therapy for my own good, right? Therapists are allowed to do that. Refer you to somebody who else who might be able to help you, but it's too much for me. But the goal is to create a relationship where you get to be you. And that looks messy. That looks wrong, for lack of a better word. But when a therapist can contain, can show compassion, non judgment, patience, empathy, understanding, curiosity, at least to that wrong behavior, that wrong thought, that wrong idea, that wrong feeling. And I'm putting all of those in quotes, of course. The person begins to heal and they begin to become who they were meant to be in the first place. And then they don't need symptoms and they don't hurt other people and bleed on other people anymore because they're healing. And I'm saying in an overly simplistic way, but that's the process. So adopted people have one thing in common, and that is they are not with their biological parent or parents, unless they're adopted by one, but you know what I mean. They have been given up. And no matter how you frame it, appropriately so, in terms of it being an act of love from the biological parent, the child has a visceral, innate, primal experience of being rejected, of being too much, of being a burden, of being an inconvenience. And those feelings, those thoughts, those things, no matter how deep they are, no matter how unspoken and silent those experiences are on the surface, the child has some of that. And they need a safe place to express it and feel it all. And a person who's not going to correct it, not going to reframe it, not going to try to make them feel better, but a person who's going to help them grieve. And in many ways, that's what therapy is. It's helping people grieve and deal with loss. Somebody writes this. Thank you for the question. Somebody writes, how do the boundaries differ between other adults and our children? I tolerate much more from my children than I would from another adult because I know I have passed on my wounds to them. Well, I just don't have that much energy for other people's wounds, right? I do a job where I hold people all day, and then I have my 4 children. So it's about energy. I wouldn't, I don't have the energy to take on the trauma of the grocery store clerk or the mail carrier or the real estate agent who's trying to sell our house. I don't want to be. I don't want to be everybody's therapist and everybody's father. So it's different. You occupy a different. I think the key is, as a parent, you occupy a place in the child's psyche that is just absolutely unique. Your anger is different. Your sadness is different. Your hurt is different. Your fear is different. It impacts the child differently. Now, there's some parallels. One of my favorite quotes is, the proper way of treating a child is the proper way of treating another person. A famous psychotherapist said that once. I have found that there's much more in common. The person who was cutting my hair today, they said, "What's your specialty?" And I said, "Well, I guess the thing I'm probably most known for is parenting, but I do couples work and individual work also. I deal with sexual trauma. I deal with LGBTQ people. I deal with people that are depressed and have had suicide attempts. I deal with people with learning disabilities. It's not because I'm trying to be this all things to everybody, but once you understand the fundamental nature of the human psyche, the variations become less pronounced in your mind. You just know how to be with somebody. It's a way of being. It's not a technique. Attachment-based therapy is not technique-based. Attachment parenting is not technique-based, because it's based on authenticity. And so if you're just doing a technique that's not authentic, it's not attachment-based parenting or attachment-based therapy. So they differ in some ways and they're the same in some ways. But the difference is, the primary difference is the child. This is important. The best book on this is The Drama That Gets a Child. The child is inclined, for their own survival, to repress the needs that they have, the feelings they have, the thoughts that they have, in order to maintain the proximity of their parents, in order to have their parents not abandon them or reject them. Whereas they're not going to have that until later on. They're not going to have that with the average stranger or peer. Now, eventually, that primary relationship between parent and child starts getting projected on the rest of the world. And we go out into the world imagining that we're having relationships with all kinds of different people. And we find out through psychotherapy, we're really having a relationship with just one, ourselves. And that pattern of the relationship with ourselves is based on the patterns of behaviors that were exhibited in our earliest contexts. I know this is sounding really technical, but it's, I wrote a blog in Psychology Today. I think it was in Psychology Today. You could just Google it and find it wherever I wrote it, saying, why should you be your child's best friend? Should, in quotes, of course. Because everybody says you shouldn't be your child's friend, you should be their parent. And I wrote in this article, I said, well, I think people don't understand what boundaries are. I think that people think that, with friends, you don't have to have boundaries, and with the kids you do. And I don't think that's true. I think we have to have boundaries with friends too, and with spouses, and with colleagues, and with our bosses, with our family of origin, with our brothers and sisters and parents. And so the difference is that we recognize that there's a unique position that we occupy with our child, and we save our energy more for them. If I had to live with somebody that wasn't my child, just a stranger, a neighbor, somebody that I didn't love, that I didn't feel a responsibility towards in terms of my obligation, because I brought them into this world, or I adopted them. In my case, brought them into the world through birth. I'm their birth parent. I just don't have the energy for everybody. Now, I have it for my clients. And so the way I treat I am, in this model, I am the parent that they never had. I am reparenting them to a degree, philosophically understood. You can understand it that way. I'm an authority figure. I'm somebody who my reactions and feelings are going to have a huge impact on them. I recognize that responsibility. And as a therapist, My relationship with my clients, even if they're older than me, is a lot like my relationship with a child. Only I'm better at therapy than I am at being a parent. So it's recognizing the role that you play, understanding it, and allocating the energy needed to attend to that responsibility adequately. I'll say that all again because that was a lot of words. It's understanding. The difference is understanding that in the parent relationship, you occupy a unique position. You have unique responsibilities that you don't have in any other relationship. And because of that responsibility that you've accepted, you allocate more energy for that relationship than you do for others. And you also realize that that the parent-child relationship in some ways is not reciprocal. They will not love you as much as you love them because they will not have sacrificed as much as you've sacrificed. And we end up loving the things that we sacrifice for more than anything else. You'll they can't take care of you. They're ill-equipped. It comes at the threat of their authentic sense of self. And by take care of you, what I mean is become the person that you need them to be so you feel good. Behave in ways so that you can sleep at night. Feel and think in ways that give you peace and serenity. Those are your responsibilities. And you get those met with other peers, with other adults, so that you can come back to your child. When I go, I have therapy tomorrow. When I go to therapy, I will share with my therapist things about my wife and my children in a safe space, feelings that I think would be not helpful to share with them. Now, that doesn't mean I don't talk to my family and tell my children things and talk to my, it doesn't mean that. It means that I sort it out there. I have a place that I go to each week. And I have that sacred place where somebody can kind of carry my burdens with me. And then at noon tomorrow, Mountain Time, after I'm done with my session, I'll have a little bit more pop in my step, a little bit more energy, a little bit more peace. My belly will be a little bit more full. And I'll walk back out into the room where my wife and my only child is left in the home are, and I'll have a little bit more to give because I fed myself. Somebody writes, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this quote of Samuel Beckett. The quote is, thanks. Oh, that's what they said, thanks. Here's the quote. Ever tried? Ever failed? No matter, try again, fail again. Fail better. And then they wrote, note the capitalization of again. I don't know if that's the entire quote by Samuel Beckett. I'll read it again. Ever tried? Ever failed? No matter, try again, fail better. You know, Samuel Beckett wasn't dumb. Samuel Beckett understood that the greatest lessons in life, the most valuable things involve failure. Joseph Campbell said, if you're falling, dive. It's leaning into. See, in Western culture, we try to rid our lives of darkness and of pain. Instead of what Eastern cultures and philosophies teach us and what attachment-based therapy teaches us, which is lean into it. Pain is the other side of love and affection and of caring. If you get rid of pain, you have to get rid of love. If you get rid of darkness, you have to get rid of light. Darkness is not something to be afraid of. It's just where there's no light. So we talk about the dark things. We visit it. We listen to the wounds. We listen to the demons and the triggers. We don't push them away. We embrace them. And that's what Beckett is talking about. Lean into it. See the value in failure. You know, I'll just say this. If you find my teaching valuable, and you might not, you might be a new parent who thinks this guy's crazy and I have no idea what he's talking about. That's a possibility. I hear that once in a while. But if you're listening and anything that I do adds to your life and makes you feel seen, understood, liberated, empowered, gives you some kind of peace, I want you to know that I found all of that out through failure. I found all of that out through struggle. I've paid for the wisdom that I have. And I'm not talking about the college tuition, because that was, relatively speaking, super limited. I paid through it by my mistakes, by my struggles, by walking into the dead end, by walking into the wall, by tripping, by going to therapy, and by keep going. And that's Samuel Beckett, keep going. In therapy, the messages are keep going. You're finding yourself lost, you're finding yourself more confused, keep going. You find yourself not knowing the truth anymore because the taken for granted truths and your lives are now being questioned, keep going. You realize that the way you've parented and lived your life has been built on this really shoddy foundation, keep going. You realize that you've hurt your children in very specific ways over a long period of time, and it feels horrible and dark, keep going. That's inevitable. Any kind of spiritual awakening is preceded by a spiritual death. I think that's what the baptism in many religions is about. The new life, the new birth, the new awareness, the new enlightenment is preceded by a death. And by many places, in many cases, by a feeling of lostness and loneliness. You don't go from everyday experiences to spiritual enlightenment. You don't go from everyday experiences to psychological empowerment and awareness. You go through a death. You go through shame. You go through fear. You go through confusion. That's what Beckett is talking about. Thank you. Looks like I have a 3-parter now. Long one. This will be the last one for this evening, Olivia. I won't have any time after this. Somebody writes, my 18-year-old was in wilderness for over 3 months and in a therapeutic boarding school for 9 months. He was adopted at birth, has ADHD, and has always been challenged with poor choices and oppositional defiance. And his addiction has an addiction to nicotine and THC. We took a chance and had him live at home and go to a local public school. He barely graduated and planned a high school week away. We were upfront with not paying for the trip, but we permitted him to drive our car. His car wheel blew up on the day he left, and 3 days into the trip, he said his money was gone. He had strangers in his room, but his roommate still had his money. We gave him enough money to get home and said he would pay it back, and we helped get his tire fixed, since it could have been an accident. In any event, he told us that he had the money saved for the hotel when in fact he did not, and he was planning to use it, our graduation gift of money, for everything, and it was stolen. Maybe. He always has a story about how he is getting screwed over and why he doesn't have money. Part 2. Now he is back from his trip for 3 days and is wanting to move out and wants to know whether he should buy or rent an apartment. While he is simultaneously telling me he has some issue with the bank with a negative balance and he's in trouble with his parents since he owes money for the hotel and he owes us money, I answered his apartment question, and as usual, he turned his issue on me, his mother, and had no accountability for anything. There was no wiggle room to say, I'm sorry to hear that. What do you think you will do? As I was trained to do in family therapy. I simply said something like, I do not own his mistakes. I didn't yell or talk down to him, and he called me names and threw his plate into the sink. His upper hand, he thinks, is that he will leave, and we are okay if he leaves. All the therapists say he needs to learn through the lessons. Part 3. However, I believe deep down he knows he is pretty good at home. He has it pretty good at home. I guess I would like to know if there's anything anyone can say to this type of person. It seems that when I try to answer him, help him when he asks or lashes out, and I think it is because he wants to be rescued. I want to impart help when he asks for it, but it rarely is worth the effort. I feel like it is better not to talk to him, and that in fact it is a better relationship. I am always torn between helping my son versus staying out of it, since it is rarely fruitful and usually worse. Yes, I'm working on myself and mentoring. People always say that now when they ask questions because they know I'm going to say that. Yes, I'm working on myself and mentioning things to my husband so that we can parent successfully together and so that we can live our lives without constantly looking at his. I just wondered if accountability is even learned through hard knocks or if it is anything that can be said or done without further therapy since he is done with it to promote it. Thank you. It's a long one. It's a tough one. I think the thing I've been talking about most lately is the best way to teach accountability is to model it. So making amends or apologies in real time is the best thing to do. I mean, my answer with the limited information I have is that there's nothing you can do other than the boundaries and letting him. What I would say to you is this. I hope this makes sense. It's his life, and he's going to have to figure it out. It's okay for you to set boundaries. It's okay for you to not tolerate certain behaviors directed toward you. It's absolutely okay. I don't have any trick or sly way of getting it in there. I could talk about, striking while the iron is cold. I could talk about creating safety before teaching so that he's open and the walls are down. I could talk about using clever analogies or books, but from what you're saying, he's not open to it. So the answer is no. And I know as a parent, you want him to learn. You don't sound controlling, but you want him to learn the very basic lessons of life. I get that. But I think what you're alluding to is that you're recognizing where your influence ends, where you end and he begins. And lastly, I'll say, and I haven't said this in a while, but it's a mantra that I stick to, and those of you who've been listening for a while have heard it many, many times. You can't win. You can only choose how to lose. I told that to the person cutting my hair today. I said, if I have one piece of wisdom for you with your ex, you can't win. You can only choose how to lose. And I would say that to you with him. Choosing how to lose, embracing that idea is the most liberating, empowering, serenity creating, peace creating idea that I can give to you. It's coming to terms with what is reality. It's coming to terms with life. It's coming to terms with the difference between you and the other. And making yourself available to him when he wants help or wants to listen is great. But from what you've said, from the best I can gather from the question, you're going to have to choose how to lose, and that there's nothing you can say that you haven't said. You've tried a lot. So thank you. All right, folks. Thanks for the questions. Great questions, both sent in. You can always send in questions, comments, suggestions to webinar@evoketherapy.com. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, the next available Finding You workshop is June 21st through 25th. I cannot recommend that too much. If you don't want to go to ours, you can email me at webinar@evoketherapy.com. I'll give you the names of others just so there's no conflict of interest. If you want to do it online, it's half the time and a third of the cost. You don't have to travel. It's over a weekend. We have an online option, July 14th through 16th. We also have a returning to you option that will be coming in the fall of 2023 that I will be hosting. And then, of course, I'm going to the UK this week, and we'll be running the Finding You weekend in the UK. It's got a waiting list at this point. Email intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. We have support groups for current and alumni families. The next available offering is June 22nd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. We also have once a month an alumni only meeting. June 27th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering for the alumni only meeting. And then if you are an alumni of our intensive program, July 11th is the next support group, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact Sarah D at evoketherapy.com, SARAD at evoketherapy.com, or go to evoketherapy.com/family involvement. We have family treks for our current families. Actually, we have family treks for not our current families. If you want to do a wilderness experience with your child in the middle of their wilderness experience, you can come out for several days, create a customized program for you if you have the time, if you have the inclination. You can also do that if you're not in wilderness. Contact admissions at evoketherapy.com for that. We have coaches for individuals, parents, couples, families, virtually any process that you want some work with. These are attachment based therapy trained coaches who have a vast array of experience and specialties. So contact coaching at evoketherapy.com if you would like a virtual coach, if you'd like to hire a virtual coach and enter into that. We ask all current parents to try 6 of any of the 12-step support groups. We recommend Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to refugerecovery.org or NAMI.org to find free classes and resources in your local community. All these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. Listen and like us, or not like us, subscribe to us. Like us, of course, if you want to. Subscribe to us and give us a review there, please. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and find our broadcast there, Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. Or you can go to Evoke's YouTube channel and watch the rebroadcast there. All of them are shared there. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. Or you can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives on Facebook. You can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each week where our staff are not just teaching, but sharing their own personal stories of transformation. If you want to give back, if you want to give money to people that can't afford treatment, the 3 partners that we donate time and resources to, and collaborate with include ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and the EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. You can earmark your donation for a specific population or even a specific program if you'd like to. All right, folks, I'm going to be in London all of next week, so my next broadcast will be June 28th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be talking about wilderness therapy and other short-term programs that are popping up all over the country, so I look forward to that. As always, I hope this is a helpful point of contact for you. And for and on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thank you for showing up and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.